All right, I'm here with BC Krishna. He is the founder and CEO at Centime. This is the fourth company that he's founded. Last one was Mineral Tree, where he was founder and CEO, which was acquired for 500 million by Global Payments. Centime is a B2B SaaS. They built an all-in-one cash management software for SMBs. They're around 100 people. BC, thank you for joining me here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Was that a good intro? Was that accurate? I pulled it from your LinkedIn profile.
Yeah, I mean, it is reasonably accurate, but we're always tinkering with our positioning,
Right.
and so the small modification I would make is that on the SMB scale, we're probably more mid-market than small.
Okay.
And so I think when people say small, sometimes they immediately think about micro businesses.
Right.
We are kind of focused on businesses that are a little bit more in growth mode.
Makes sense.
One way to characterize them is that these are businesses that are between about $5 and $100 million in revenue, about 50 to 1,000 people.
Got it. And was that a pivot or was that the plan from the beginning?
No, it was not a pivot. It was always, it's just really a refinement of the positioning.
Got it. Makes sense. So we chatted just before the show, and you said this is your fourth company. For better or for worse, every company was in a different category. And you said that the first, when you think about scale really for you means getting beyond the 10 million mark, and that to you, getting to that 10 million mark is the hardest part. Why is that the hardest part?
Well, I mean, there's so many things about starting a company that are hard to begin with, right? I mean, nobody knows you. You don't have enough capital. You have to, establish your thesis as being viable, and it's even worse when you're, operating in a category, operating in an area which has not yet been established as a category. I'll use a couple of examples, right? And I think I'll start with I'll use the example of my prior company, Mineral Tree. We started the company in 2011. And when we started the company, AP automation was not a thing.
Right.
And it took us a long time, and it took the market a long time to establish AP automation as a thing. It wasn't until 2015, and you can count the number of board meetings that I, took plenty of lashes on my back to, to convince investors that, what, this is going to happen. It is going to happen. But 4 years of like trying to really get to the point where the category is like real and starts to scale can be a very long journey. And so that's really the biggest challenge is that, you have limited capital, you have limited goodwill as far as your investors are concerned. You're trying to build a product that you think is going to meet the market needs, but the market actually has not been established yet. So the design language associated with the category has not yet been established. There's a lot of challenges with trying to create a product in a category that does not exist, while at the same time trying to convince everybody, your investors, your prospective customers, the leaders within the organization that are responsible for doing things like selling. I mean, it can be a very lonely and difficult journey.
Right. A question on that, given what you just said, that it took 4 years until the category even became a thing. One, what have you learned about market timing? And two, follow up to that, how do you stick through that period and have conviction? Because it might be 4 years, it might be 2 years, it might be 8 years.
Yeah, these are not easy questions to answer, right? I think that the market timing issue is a really interesting one, because if you're late to a market, then you're dealing with having to defend yourself against established competitors, and there's a certain benefit to being second or third in a market, right? Because you can point to the others and say, "I've built a better mousetrap."
Right.
But often what you're dealing with is more of maybe a price war, feature functionality war, and the dynamics of entering a market a little later, second or third, can be a little bit challenging. The flip side of it is that if you're early to a market, you clearly have the first mover advantage. But sometimes what you're doing is spending more money than you think you should be spending to establish your market. An ideal situation is where you have two or three other entrepreneurs like yourself who also are puttering around the same space. And although we don't necessarily have conversations with each other, more than one company sort of tries to drive momentum, into that particular category. And that likely is always going to happen, especially if it turns out that the problem is real, right? In the case of Mineral Tree and AP automation, I'll tell you that it was us, Bill.com, Avid Exchange, and a couple of other companies that all were formed, within like 2, 3, 4 years of each other.
Mm-hmm.
All of us had the same general view that this is a problem worth solving, had a great deal of conviction that is absolutely needs to be solved. Because, let me answer the conviction question, right? Conviction really comes from looking at the problem and saying, how is it possible that this still exists? And then saying, is there a solution that is viable?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because you have to map those two. Does a problem exist? Yes. I talk to enough people and get conviction that the problem exists. The other side of it is that, can I fashion a solution that actually solves this problem in a reasonable fashion with the right economics in mind?
Right.
Right? You really still have to think about all of the basics of SaaS, all the basic SaaS metrics. So you have to think about, how am I going to sell? What are my channels? How much is it going to cost? What are my gross margins? Because at the end of the day, as much as I would like to think that this is something that I can fund myself, the reality is that to scale a business, you have to depend upon institutional funding and all that goes with it, right? There's an expectation that institutional investors have that you're going to run a business that falls into the general rubric of a SaaS company. So I know I jumped around a little bit, but
Yeah.
just to sort of break it down, right? Conviction results from feeling like there's a problem to be solved and that you can solve it in a reasonable fashion. Timing is tricky. You can't always get it right. My proclivity is to go after businesses which are not in categories that are not yet established,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that has challenges, right? Because you're often the first or second in a market, and you have to really prove to yourself, to customers, to investors, to partners, to employees that this is worth going after. But if you are successful, then I think that the outcomes can be great.
Would you say that then the inverse is true, that if you're puttering around a problem, let's say in a new category, and there's no one else out there who's puttering around with the same problem, that's a red flag, that maybe there isn't really a problem here?
You learn very quickly if customers don't respond positively. This is the so-called pivot that everybody makes, right? You have a concept, you think this is a problem, you go out and start to test the market, and people don't respond positively. I mean, I think this is a lot of what entrepreneurship is about.
Right.
It's about reading what customers are saying to you. It's actually trying to understand what they mean rather than what they say, right? I mean, when you talk to somebody and say, this is the problem I have, and they say, maybe. Now you have two choices. You can try to convince them that there's a problem. And if you're not successful in convincing them, you know what? You got to move on.
Right.
On the
Yeah.
other hand, that conversation may result in a sort of pivot, so to speak.
Right.
And then you can just really follow that along to see where that leads you.
Yeah. Maybe you were naturally good at that, but I think a lot of founders are really bad at actually properly asking questions and do market research. I'm reading a book called The Mom Test right now, and it talks about how to ask good questions. And most founders, how they ask people is they go to people and they tell them their idea and they say, I want to build the Uber of Airbnb. What do you think? And then people kind of naturally, because they don't want to disappoint you, they say, well, that sounds exciting. But what
It's
you really need to be doing on them and what they spend time, and you need to ask, hey, do you use Uber? And they say yes. And you're like, have you ever considered using another option? They're like, no, I'm happy. Maybe there's nothing there, because if they would really have a problem here, they would be looking for something I would have Googled or asked people. So I think it's a real skill.
It really is. And I think that there's the trick, I think, in my mind is to just really ask about the problem, not the solution.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a thesis that there is a problem in a particular space, right? I think it's important to, it's very tricky. It really is. And I have, at my company, even subsets of problems are things that, we try to go out and get market research on. And even how you ask those questions and the vehicles that you use to ask those questions can be tricky. Do you do surveys? Okay, well, surveys are not easy to do. Doing
Mm-hmm.
surveys properly is a very tricky thing, right? I mean, who are you going to ask? What is their incentive? Are you going to pay them to answer the question? Are you going to answer the question 6 different ways so that you can arrive at the right science? Is it better? What is better? Do you want quantity or do you want quality? At some level, you can go out and say, I'm going to go after a representative sample of customers to see what input and feedback I get. Or I can say, I'm going to go to 3 really nasty people that I know who are going to push back on everything that I say to them and try to convince them, right? I mean, the truth is that the answer is somewhere in between. But my view is that you really have to have very thick skin and you have to talk about the problem before you talk about the solution. And I think a lot of times what people will make is they take a VC pitch based approach to talking to customers. That is the cart leading the horse, right? I mean, I'm going to go to the VC and say, I am XYZ for ABC, right? That's what they want to hear, perhaps. But the fact is that, if you're able to very clearly state the problem and then establish the pain associated with that problem and say that, this is the market that faces this problem, then I think you can then sort of lead people naturally to the solution. You have to be convinced that the problem exists.
You said earlier that really the only way to scale software is to get institutional money or funding. Is that true, though?
No, it's not true. I'm just saying that I was using that as an example and saying that, if you think about all of the sources of capital that you would use to scale a business, you can use your own. Again, all of these have outcomes that have, you can decide like where the path takes you. You can go to strategic investors, or you can go to the market that has institutional investors. That's it, right? I mean, or you can bootstrap, I suppose, build it out of cash flows. And I think those are things that, you have to just make a decision. The reason I use institutional investors is because it's a pretty well-established market for capital. And in this day and age, it scales very well. It has its, challenges. Everything has its challenges, but by and large, I think of it as a relatively efficient market.
So this is your 4th company. You sold your last company. What were a couple of the things? I feel like every time you build a company, you make a bunch of mistakes and then you tell yourself, oh, next time around, I'm going to do this differently. What were maybe some of the things that you did differently from the beginning for this 4th time around?
I mean, we can spend the whole day here, Finn, just talking about all of the mistakes. I tend to be more introspective about these things. I think about these things probably too much. And again, some of them are very arcane and too specific, operationally specific about the business that we're in. I don't know if you want to hear them, but one thing I'll tell you is that I'll highlight 2 things. Number one is that I have felt that too often people fall into this trap of the MVP. So so-called minimum viable product, right? And you have to sort of step back and say, what is that really about? What is the sort of purpose of building a minimum viable product, right? And, when we started this company, we said like, okay, what is it that we're trying to do? What is the product that would appeal to the market? How long would it take us to build it? How can we be differentiated when we go to market with that solution? Too often people fall into the trap of the MVP being nothing more than a glorified demo. It is not a functional solution. It is a demo. It is indicative and evocative of your vision and what you're trying to do. And it might be sufficient for you to go from a pre-seed company to a seed company. And at some level, there's a great deal of pretense associated with the fact that this is real. People use fanciful terms like beta and first customers and MVP and things like this. And I just don't think that you have to be honest with yourself and say, this is not a product. This is a demo, right? How many customers do you have? Okay. So I think that, one thing that I did want to do is to make sure that we use the term maximally viable product. So a lot of people don't have the opportunity to do this but because of, some things that, of how this company was bootstrapped and funded, we had the opportunity to have a little bit of extra capital to basically take about 9 quarters to build this product. People don't really have the luxury to do that. I just had, and I felt like I could take advantage of it. And so we did. The result was that we created a product that was very, very fully featured and, and something that from the get-go, we were very comfortable putting in front of customers and not using the word beta and things like this. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. I have a follow-up question, but you mentioned there's 2 things that you did differently.
The second thing is The second thing is that uh, my previous two companies, we built an engineering team. Costs matter, right? And engineers are expensive. And it's very difficult. And by the way, unemployment is whatever it is, 2.5%, 3%.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're in the Northeast and everybody wants to, move to California and work for Facebook and Google, it can be very challenging to actually have a cost-effective engineering operation.
Mm-hmm.
So we at Mineral Tree, my previous company, we had a hybrid operation, right? We had, some people here, some people offshore.
Mm-hmm.
The offshore team was not really employees of the company. They were contractors. And other companies do this sort of thing. They have India, Ukraine,
Yep.
Belarus, all these different places where they have, offshore engineers. Hey, if it works for you, great, right? But for me, it didn't work.
Uh-huh.
And what's even worse was this idea that you have this tension, between the US operation and the India operation, where the India folks feel like that they're put upon and they're like, there to do all the dirty work and
Mm-hmm.
maintenance, and all the crap that's handed over to them, or all the plum stuff, resides with the US team. So from the get-go, we decided that that was not going to work. And so we basically established our engineering operation completely in India and made a
Mm-hmm.
commitment that we were not going to have a US-based engineering team. So, we don't have, I mean, the only thing that we have in the US is sales, marketing, and customer success.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, our engineering team in India is employees of the company. I tend to think of the fact that I tend to believe that we pay them well, very, very well. I tend to believe that, they are compensated like any, compensation structure is the same as any US employee. In other words, they have benefits, they have stock options.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, we hire very well. We have very low attrition. And comes from a commitment, to say that, you're it. There's nobody else here. You guys make the decisions. Nobody's going to tell you what to do. Nobody's going to set your agenda. It's a very big shift for us, for me.
I'm making a big assumption here. So, but it seems like you have Indian roots. Do you think, in terms of cultural differences, does that matter? Like a founder, CTO who does not have Indian roots, can they do this, or would it not work, or it just doesn't matter?
They can do it, but they have to get over the bias that it's not going to work.
Uh huh.
A lot of people approach this from the standpoint of saying, oh, X, Y, D, Z did this and it didn't work for them. Therefore, it won't work for me.
Yep.
But of course it works. You have to make a commitment to make it work. And so, yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I have a natural advantage because I have very deep cultural knowledge of the fact that, hey, these are great people. We can make it work. They're very smart. They're hungry. They're committed. They want the opportunity.
Yeah.
On the other hand, if you were to take the approach that says, oh, yeah, this is cheap labor and there's, tons of people there that I can sort of pawn this stuff off onto, that will be a mistake.
Yeah. Makes sense.
What was your follow up on the first point?
You said you spent 9 quarters building the product. When is the right time to go to market? Or how do you know it's the right time to finally put your baby out into the world?
Yeah, the answer is the same, right? I think that you don't build product in a vacuum.
Yep.
Right? You have to just really every step of the product development process has to be calibrated through your own assessment of whether this is going to work or not, and whether or not you believe the market is going to be accepting of it, right? And that comes from talking to your early contacts, your early customers. And your point earlier, it's extremely tricky because the incentives that people have in engaging with you, prospective customers that have to engage with you during that phase, not just the incentives, also the proclivity and time that they're willing to give you, very, very, very difficult, right? I mean, how do you incent them? Do you make them an advisor? Do you give them some options? Do you do this? I mean, does that set up the wrong incentives, right? But I think that I don't know how to say this other than you have to use your own judgment.
Yeah.
And you're probably going to make a mistake no matter how hard you try, right?
Right.
In our case, what we thought we had and thankfully, what we thought we had and what the market needed, the gap was relatively small. We were able to, and it's constant. The gap is constant. But just in terms from a launch point, it was probably like 2 quarters of additional work that we needed to do to close some gaps that we didn't anticipate.
Are you in the camp of launch too early when you feel like your product is not there yet? or in the camp of like get everything right and once you
No,
feel
I don't belong in the camp of launch too early. I mean, I belong in the camp of timing it so that again, it's a judgment, right?
right,
If you're very late to the market, then it's back to the same thing, which is like, you're behind the eight ball from a competitive standpoint.
right.
Don't get me wrong. I think it's both of those options are perfectly fine. It's as long as you're willing to deal with the consequences of those actions.
Makes sense.
That's it. I mean, there's nothing wrong in saying that I want to launch early because I'm going to learn from it. There's nothing wrong in saying that I'm going to hold it for a couple of ticks before I launch because, hey, that's how I develop confidence that my solution is going to work better. But you have to deal with the consequences of it. It means that you have to fight like other people saying, hey, you're just like XYZ company. How are you different? Right.
Yeah. I'm
Mhm.
curious, you've built a couple of companies now. How do you in your head, and maybe you don't at all, think about different stages? Can be in terms of revenue milestones, can be in terms of a different milestone, but what are the distinct stages that you kind of see your companies going through?
Revenue is a great proxy. Number of customers is a great proxy. The scale, I mean, the repeatability of the sales process is a great proxy. Those
Mm-hmm.
are three things that I would look at, right? Who are your first customers? Are they buying your solution for the right reason? Revenue is a proxy. First customers are a proxy. Sales repeatability is a proxy. These are all good sort of proxies to determine right stages. And remember, the other thing that I said is that my most of my thought revolves around getting to about 10 million, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you're in a new category that often can be the most difficult part of the process. Once you get to 10 million, it's a very different, scaling
Mm-hmm.
exercise. That's not to say that it's easy. I'm just saying I just want to focus on that sort of 0 to 10 million. So what you want to do is to make sure that customers are buying the product for the right reason. Getting that first customer can be very difficult. And it is completely okay to give customers some perverse incentives, to buy your product. But at some level, you have to step away from those incentives and say, like, okay, are you buying this because you have real pain, or are you buying this because you love me?
Mm.
Right? Those are two different issues. And I think and you have to really be honest with yourself about why they're buying your solution. You have like a reasonable number of customers, and reasonable depends upon what business you're in. If you're in the business of selling to hundreds of thousands or dozens,
Yep.
that changes. But a reasonable number of customers that sort of are buying your product for the right reason, they're paying you roughly what you anticipate.
Mm-hmm.
Those are really good indicators of, the fact that, you're on the right path.
What metrics do you pay closest attention to on that 0 to 10, let's say?
It's all the standard ones, right? I mean, how many customers? What is the average ACV?
Mm-hmm.
What are the trend lines on your gross margin, your CAC LTV ratios? What are they trending like? What are the cost of sale? Those are the tangible metrics that you want to be looking at. The intangibles, of course, are things like, who's doing the sale? What does the process look like? Does it look the same from customer to customer? Are you changing it? Is your pricing bespoke? These are all things that I think you want to be looking at as you kind of go from. I mean, I think the first million is really hard. And I think that the first million, you're going to do things that are just not good. Um, but once you get past that million or so, then you really want to be very disciplined about, just the way in which you track things, you report things, look at your pipeline, look at your inventory, look at how the process is scaling, looking at the conversion rates. Yeah, all of these things really matter.
What stage is the most fun to you? 0 to 1, 1 to 5, 5 to 10, 10 and beyond.
It is fun. I love this. I really do. I mean, all of it is great fun. It's such a intellectually consuming exercise.
Mm-hmm.
you know I mean, difficult is also fun, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
because and that's the lesson I've always learned, is that you got to be determined to enjoy the journey.
Right.
It's not about the destination. It really is always about the journey.
Do you have, and you can pull from Centime, your current company, or from any of the previous, can you remember any especially dark days?
Oh yeah.
Are
Oh
you
yeah.
willing to share any particular?
Solution to make payments to your suppliers, and I screw up somehow. it's not good,
No.
right? There's an expectation that, the money that comes out of your account ends up in the right place. And when that is delayed or doesn't happen, all hell breaks loose, right? And when it happens at scale, it's really bad.
Mm-hmm.
That has happened, you know,
Mm-hmm.
uh, in the past. And dark days, you kind of reflect upon that and say, like, okay, it could have been worse. And we got out and we survived and we basically built something that, prevented this from occurring again.
Yeah.
So that's one example. The second one is, you don't want to be in a situation, well, you know, when again, without getting specific, I'll tell you that, we were in situations where we had, 2 weeks of cash in the bank.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not the only one that faced this situation, right? It's very, very hard, when you know that. And what's especially hard is when you have a product, you have customers, it's actually selling, but you don't have the cash in the bank and the cash flow to support the next phase of growth,
Mm-hmm.
right? And for a variety of reasons, you're in the situation where you have to, like, wonder about how you're going to make the next payroll. That's really hard, right? You have 150 people who you're responsible for in some way, shape, or form. You have a business that's pretty good, all things considered, but you simply don't have the cash and the working capital to get to the next phase. And that's just timing. It's like it's being worked. It's going to happen, but it hasn't happened fast enough. And those are dark days is probably a good way to describe it. I think that, to me, like, the emotion of the fact that you are committed to 100 plus people and their families, and they depend upon your leadership to get you to the next phase, is very, very difficult. It's very emotional. It's just really visceral. It's the only way for me to describe it.
Do you tell people?
I'm very open with this.
Interesting. I've heard
Very,
both side of the argument, right? One is you need to, as the founder, eat it up and not let the team know that you might be running out of money because they need to stay motivated. The other side says, no, you should be transparent about where you're at financially because maybe they can help and it's also fair. So,
yeah, my view is transparency. My view, first of all, let me step back and say that, I believe that trust is the single biggest factor, important element of building a company, especially a startup. You know, and your investors have to trust you. You have to trust your employees. We have to trust each other. And the only way you can engender and foster trust is by being transparent. Bad stuff happens. And as they say, like, if everything is going great, nobody cares. But when the shit hits the fan, pardon my expression, who is going to help you navigate through those difficult situations, right? People who are fully aware of everything that's going on, people who are trusting, people who are with the mission.
mm-hmm.
Those are the ones that really rally around. And you can't just turn trust on day one. It doesn't work like that. It has to be basic. It has to be fundamentally woven into the fabric of the culture of the company. And I talk about this a lot. Trust, teamwork, and reliance and customer focus are three components of our culture that, I really kind of, try to reinforce a lot. I really belong to the school of being very open and transparent. And you know what? If it doesn't work for you, I'm really sorry. You should go find another place where you don't have the sort of same problems that we have, right?
Right.
This is a startup. You're going to get seasick. You're going to get buffeted around by winds of change. And if basically you're not able to handle that, then this is not the place for you.
Were all four of your companies successful?
By what measure? I'll tell you the outcomes, and you can tell me. The fourth one that I'm in right now, is
Sure.
still a work in progress. Signs are positive, but it's still early. I think that if you were to look at the amount of capital that was raised and the outcome, and the fact that that was a good outcome. Before Mineral Tree, Memento went sideways, but we didn't lose money.
Mm-hmm.
I think that in the end, I would say that, everybody, investors, we all decided that was a really tough business to scale.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, And you talk about making mistakes. There was a lot of mistakes that we made around like, go to market and things like that. It's a story for another day. But that went sideways. Um, the you know, Future Tense was the first company. I would say that was a very good outcome as well. We raised 11 million, sold the company for 125 million, but that went up to 600 million with no collar on it. So
Mhm.
kind of interesting. Um, so yeah, I mean, those were good outcomes. I think Memento was, I wish we had done some things early on in the company to get our go-to-market strategy right.
Tell me, what were the go-to-market mistakes? Maybe just
So
say like one sentence
one
what you guys were
sentence, right?
doing, what you were
We were
selling.
a little too focused on selling to banks, and the number of banks in our target market were too few. But the technology was fairly ubiquitous. If I had stepped back and thought about what it is that we were doing, and thought about the market opportunity a little differently, I think we would have scaled the business differently.
I see. And you realized it too late when there was no more time or cash to pivot again?
Yeah, it was an odd time, 2008,
Ah.
2009.
Mhm.
Uh, and so the company was started in 2004. We built the product, got into the market, fell into this space that was more fraud detection, had a couple of early wins, JP Morgan, PNC, people like that. And
Mhm.
sometimes view these as like big wins, but they're really false positives.
Right.
Uh, and so, you have to be careful to watch for these false positives and pretend that there's a market there. But the reality is that if I'd stepped back and thought about it, there's only so many JP Morgans and PNCs,
Right.
you know? And so how am I going to scale the business? So I think that was the challenge. It was just really not being introspective enough. And it's also early SaaS. 2008, 2009 was still this kind of weird transition from enterprise to SaaS.
Hmm.
It was not a great time to be thinking about how to scale a business.
Right. Why are you still, let's say, in the game now? I mean, it looks like you could decide to, I don't know, do the metaphorical laying on the beach and drinking some cocktails type of thing. Why do it all over again?
Because I like it. I mean, it's pretty simple. For me, building companies is about solving problems.
Hmm.
And the opportunity to solve big problems that create great outcomes is what is the reason I do it. It's like, and it's really, I view this more as a creative exercise than anything else.
Hmm.
You write a book, you make a painting, you host a podcast. It's a creative exercise, and to me, company building is a creative exercise. And I think that the fact is that that creative exercise is directly connected to a financial outcome, makes it that much more interesting and better.
That's I think I guess that's what you talk about enjoying the journey rather than the outcome, because clearly it was not about the outcome for you.
Yeah, I mean, the outcome is how you keep score,
Right.
but you know, but but the outcome is a one shot, it's a singular event, right?
Yeah.
But you live the company creation every day. You live the company's evolution every hour, every minute, and you have no choice but to really enjoy the journey.
All
If you
right.
really are
Couple.
always thinking about like, oh my God, like how am I going to sell this company? Then you know what? That's just it.
Right. All right. A couple rapid fire questions to wrap it up. So if you want to keep your replies short and concise, growing and scaling a company, I believe, takes to you to grow and scale as a person and as a leader. How are you, making sure that you as a person and leader are evolving to stay up to date with the needs of the growing company?
Yeah, I mean, you have to be self-aware. You have to be humble. You have to make sure that, the mistakes that are made when they're pointed out to you don't get defensive, that you really look at them and say like, okay, yes, I accept the fact that that was a mistake. Let me correct myself.
Which founder or CEO do you look up to or learn from?
There's a few that come to mind. To me, one of my favorite people is John Warnock, who was the founder and CEO of Adobe. And this is a gentleman that passed away recently. But John Warnock is, I think of as he built a great company. He was a scientist. He was at, you know, Yeah, John Warnock is one of my heroes.
What's your favorite resource for growing your company? Can be book, person.
Research. I mean, fundamental primary research, learning, talking to people, reflecting upon things and letting them marinate for a while. I don't think that there's a singular data point that gives you the answer. It's often reflection and learning and continuous evolution that gets you to the place that you need to be.
Yeah.
Being able to, say that the decision I made yesterday was the wrong decision. Let me revisit that. I think is also important.
What's a new recent tool that you bought that you're loving?
Oh my God. I'm a Luddite. I have a healthy disrespect for technology. I love technology. I'm an early adopter. I do lots of, tinkering around with technology, but I also like tend to be very skeptical.
Mm.
This is kind of, maybe, not what you anticipated, but we put in a new geothermal system in our house.
Okay.
So that is like a new technology, that I will tell you that I'm excited by. So, going from like having an antiquated gas-fired, Freon, like traditional coolant powered air conditioning system to having something that's like, more eco-friendly and like more efficient is something that I get excited about.
That does sound very exciting. Last question. What's next for you and Centime?
Look, I think for us, it's, we're just trying to get to the next phase in our growth. Growing from 1 million to 5 million, million to 10 million is really where, we're trying to be.
Yep.
And in all of the things that I just told you about, right? How do I make sure that the repeatability, the scalability, the core metrics associated with the business, making sure that we sell the same thing to the same people over and over and over again, with the right metrics and the right margins, that is as boring as it sounds. That's what we're in. That's what is, I get excited about, and that's what we need to be doing.
Love it. Well, thank you for joining me. I had fun. You strike me as a person who would be fun to grab a beer with or something, even though we talked about, like growing companies and stuff. But yeah, I had fun. So
thank you. Yeah, no, I think that I have, yeah, I mean, I have a lot of interest in ideas and have opinions that may not align with others, but that's, we need all kinds of people to make up the world, I suppose.
totally, for sure. All right, your links, both your LinkedIn and the link to your company will be in the show notes. So if anyone is interested, they can check you out there. And thank you for your time.